Welcome to Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. We'd like to thank our listeners. If you enjoy our shows, please write a review on the podcast's app. Also, share us with a friend. Find us on snoozecast.com and follow us on social media and wherever you listen to podcasts. This episode is supported by our Patreon supporters and by Petticoat Trousers. Tonight, we'll read a letter Thomas Jefferson sent to Maria Cosway in 1786. Jefferson met Cosway while traveling in France and was rather charmed by the Italian-English artist. In this letter, a sorrowful Jefferson imagines a debate between his head and his heart. A statesman, scholar, inventor, and third president of the United States, Jefferson wrote some 18,000 letters in his lifetime. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. To Maria Cosway, Paris, October 12th, 1786. My dear Madam, having performed the last sad office of handing you into your carriage at the Pavilion des Saint-Denis, and seen the wheels get actually into motion, I turned on my heel and walked, more dead than alive, to the opposite door, where my own was awaiting me. Mr. Dankerville was missing. He was sought for, found, and dragged downstairs. We were crammed into the carriage, like recruits for the Bastille, and not having soul enough to give orders to the coachman, he presumed Paris our destination, and drove off. After a considerable interval, silence was broke. This was a signal for a mutual confession of distress. We began immediately to talk of Mr. and Mrs. Cosway, of their goodness, their talents, their amiability, and, though we spoke of nothing else, we seemed hardly to have entered into the matter when the coachman announced the Rue Saint-Denis, and that we were opposite Mr. Dankerville's. He insisted on descending there and traversing a short passage to his lodgings. I was carried home. Seated by my fireside, solitary and sad, the following dialogue took place between my head and heart. Head. Well, friend, you seem to be in a pretty trim. Heart. I am indeed the most wretched of all earthly beings, overwhelmed with grief, every fiber of my frame distended beyond its natural powers to bear. I would willingly meet whatever catastrophe should leave me no more to feel or to fear. Head. These are the eternal consequences of your warmth and precipitation. This is one of the scrapes into which you are ever leading us. You confess your follies, indeed, but still you hug and cherish them, and no reformation can be hoped where there is no repentance. Heart. Oh, my friend, this is no moment to upbraid my foibles. I am rent into fragments by the force of my grief. If you have any balm, pour it into my wounds. If none, do not harrow them by new torments. Spare me in this awful moment. At any other, I will attend with patience to your admonitions. Head. On the contrary, I never found that the moment of triumph, with you, was the moment of attention to my admonitions. While suffering under your follies, you may perhaps be made sensible of them. You fancy it can never return. Harsh, therefore, as the medicine may be, it is my office to administer it. You will be pleased to remember that when our friend Trumbull used to be telling us of the merits and talents of these good people, I never ceased whispering to you that we had no occasion for new acquaintances, that the greater their merits and talents, the more dangerous their friendship to our tranquility, because the regret at parting would be greater. Heart. Accordingly, sir, this acquaintance was not the consequence of my doings. It was one of your projects, which threw us in the way of it. It was you, remember, and not I, who desired the meeting at Legrand and Molinos. I never trouble myself with domes nor arches. The hall might have rotted down before I should have gone to see it. But you, forsooth, who are eternally getting us to sleep with your diagrams and crotchets, must go and examine this wonderful piece of architecture. And when you had seen it, oh, it was the most superb thing on earth. What you had seen there was worth all you had yet seen in Paris. I thought so, too. But I meant it of the lady and gentleman to whom we had been presented, and not of a parcel of sticks and chips put together in pens. You, then, sir, and not I, have been the cause of the present distress. Head. It would have been happy for you if my diagrams and crotchets had gotten you to sleep on that day, as you are pleased to say they eternally do. My visit had public utility for its object. A market is to be built in Richmond. What a commodious plan is that of Legrand, especially if we put on it the noble dome. If such a bridge as they showed us can be thrown across the Schuylkill at Philadelphia, the floating bridges taken up, and the navigation of that river opened, what a copious resource will be added of wood and provisions to warm and feed the poor of the city. While I was occupied with these objects, you were dilating with your new acquaintances and contriving how to prevent a separation from them. Every soul of you had an engagement for the day, yet all these were to be sacrificed, that you might dine together. Lying messengers were to be dispatched into every quarter of the city, with apologies for your breach of engagement. You, particularly, had the effrontery to send word to the Duchess of Danville that on the moment we were setting out to dine with her, dispatches came to hand, which required immediate attention. You wanted me to invent a more ingenious excuse, but I knew you were getting into a scrape, and I would have nothing to do with it. Heart. Oh, my dear friend, how you have revived me by recalling to my mind the transactions of that day. How well I remember them all, and that, when I came home at night and looked back to the morning, it seemed to have been a month agone. Go on, then, like a kind comforter, and paint to me the day we went to St. Germain's. How beautiful was every object. The hills along the Seine, the rainbows of the Machine of March, the terrace of St. Germain's, the chateau, the gardens, the statues of Marly, the pavilion of desert. How grand the idea excited by the remains of such a column. The spiral staircase, too, was beautiful. Every moment was filled with something agreeable. The wheels of time moved on with a rapidity of which those of our carriage gave but a faint idea. And yet, in the evening, when one took a retrospect of the day, what a mass of happiness we had traveled over. Retrace those scenes to me, my good companion, and I will forgive the unkindness with which you were chiding me. The day we went to St. Germain's was a little too warm, I think. Was it not? Head. Thou art the most incorrigible of all the beings that ever sinned. I reminded you of the follies of the first day, intending to deduce from thence some useful lessons for you. But instead of listening to them, you kindle at the recollection. You retrace the whole series with a fondness which shows you want nothing but the opportunity to act it over again. I often told you, during its course, that you were imprudently engaging your affections under circumstances that must have cost you a great deal of pain, that the persons, indeed, were of the greatest merit, possessing good sense, good humor, honest hearts, honest manners, and eminence in a lovely art, that the lady had, moreover, qualities and accomplishments such as music, modesty, beauty, and a softness of disposition, but that all those considerations would increase the pang of separation, that their stay here was to be snort, that you rack our whole system when you are parted from those you love, complaining that such a separation is worse than death, inasmuch as this ends our sufferings, whereas that only begins them, and that the separation would, in this instance, be the more severe, as you would probably never see them again. Heart. But they told me they would come back again, the next year. Head. But, in the meantime, see what you suffer, and their return, too, depends on so many circumstances, that if you had a grain of prudence, you would not count upon it. Upon the whole, it is improbable, and therefore you should abandon the idea of ever seeing them again. Heart. May heaven abandon me if I do. Head. Very well. Suppose, then, they come back. They are to stay 2 months, and, when these are expired, what is to follow? Perhaps you flatter yourself they may come to America? Heart. God only knows what is to happen. I see nothing impossible in that supposition, and I see things wonderfully contrived sometimes to make us happy. Where could they find such objects as in America for the exercise of their enchanting art? Especially the lady, who paints landscapes so inimitably she wants only subjects worthy of immortality to render her pencil immortal. The falling spring, the cascade of Niagara, the passage of the Potomac through the Blue Mountains, the natural bridge. It is worth a voyage across the Atlantic to see these objects, much more to paint and to make them, and thereby ourselves, known to all ages. And our own dear Monticello. Where has nature spread so rich a mantle under the eye? Mountains, forest, rocks, rivers. With what majesty do we there ride above the storms? How sublime to look down into the workhorse of nature, to see her clouds, hail, snow, rain, thunder, all fabricated at our feet, and the glorious sun, when rising as if out of a distant water, just gliding to the tops of the mountains and giving life to all nature. I hope in God no circumstance may ever make either seek an asylum from grief. With what sincere sympathy I would open every cell of my composition to receive the effusion of their woes. I would pour my tears into their wounds, and if a drop of balm could be found on the top of the Cordilleras or at the remotest sources of the Missouri, I would go thither myself to seek and to bring it. Deeply practiced in the school of affliction, the human heart knows no joy which I have not lost, no sorrow of which I have not drunk. Fortune can present no grief of unknown form to me. Who, then, can so softly bind up the wound of another as he who has felt the same wound himself? But heaven forbid they should ever know a sorrow. Let us turn over another leaf, for this has distracted me. Head. Well, let us put this possibility to trial then, on another point. When you consider the character which is given of our country by the lying newspapers of London and their credulous copiers in other countries, when you reflect that all Europe is made to believe we are a lawless banditti in a state of absolute anarchy, cutting one another's throats and plundering without distinction, how could you expect that any reasonable creature would venture among us? Heart. But you and I know that all this is false. There is not a country on earth where there is greater tranquility, where the laws are milder or better obeyed, where everyone is more attentive to his own business, or meddles less with that of others, where strangers are better received, more hospitality treated, and with a more sacred respect. Head. True, you and I know this, but your friends do not know it. Heart. But they are sensible people who think for themselves. They will ask of impartial foreigners who have been among us whether they saw or heard on the spot any instance of anarchy. They will judge, too, that a people, occupied as we are, in opening rivers, digging navigable channels, making roads, building public schools, establishing academies, erecting busts and statues to our great men, protecting religious freedom, reforming and improving our laws in general. They will judge, I say, for themselves. Whether this is not evidence of our true state than a London newspaper hired to lie, and from which no truth can ever be extracted but by reversing everything it says. Head. I did not begin this lecture, my friend, with a view to learn from you what America is doing. Let us return, then, to our point. I wish to make you sensible how imprudent it is to place your affections, without reserve, no objects you must so soon lose, and whose loss, when it comes, must cost you such severe pangs. Remember the last night. You knew your friends were to leave Paris today. This was enough to throw you in agonies. All night you tossed us from one side of the bed to the other. No sleep, no rest. The poor crippled wrist, too, never left one moment in the same position. Now up, now down, now here, now there. Was it to be wondered at if its pains returned? The surgeon then was to be called, and to be rated as an ignoramus, because he could not divine the cause of this extraordinary change. In fine, my friend, you must mend your manners. This is not a world to live at random in, as you do, to avoid those eternal distresses to which you are forever exposing us. You must learn to look forward before you take a step which may interest our peace. Everything in this world is a matter of calculation. Advance then with caution, the balance in your hand. Put into one scale the pleasures which any object may offer, but put fairly into the other the pains which are to follow, and see which preponderates. The making an acquaintance is not a matter of indifference. When a new one is proposed to you, view it all around. Consider what advantages it presents, and to what inconveniences it may expose you. Do not bite at the bait of pleasure till you know there is no hook beneath it. The art of life is the art of avoiding pain, and he is the best pilot who steers clearest of the rocks and shoals with which it is beset. Pleasure is always before us, but misfortune is at our side. While running after that, this arrests us. The most effectual means of being secure against pain is to retire within ourselves and to suffice for our own happiness. Those which depend on ourselves are the only pleasures a wise man will count on. For nothing is ours which another may deprive us of. Hence, the inestimable value of intellectual pleasures, ever in our power, always leading us to something new, never cloying. We ride serene and sublime above the concerns of this mortal world, contemplating truths in nature, matter, and motion, the laws which bind up their existence, and that eternal being who made and bound them up by those laws. Let this be our employ. Leave the bustle of society to those who have not talents to occupy themselves without them. Friendship is but another name for an alliance with the follies and the misfortunes of others. Our own share of miseries is sufficient. Why enter then as volunteers into those of another? Is there so little gall poured into our cup that we must need help to drink that of our neighbor? A friend dies or leaves us. We feel as if a limb were cut off. He is sick. We must watch over him and participate of his pains. His fortune is shipwrecked. Ours must be laid under contribution. He loses a child, a parent, or a partner. We must mourn the loss as if it were our own. Heart. And what more sublime delight than to mingle tears with one whom the hand of heaven hath smitten, to watch over the bed of sickness, and to beguile its tedious and its painful moments, to share our bread with one to whom misfortune has left none. This world abounds indeed with misery. To lighten its burthen, we must divide it with one another. But let us now try the virtue of your mathematical balance, and as you have put into one scale the burthens of friendship, let me put its comforts into the other. When languishing then under disease, how grateful is the solace of our friends! How are we penetrated with their attentions? How much are we supported by their encouragements and kind offices? When heaven has taken from us some object of our love, how sweet is it to have a bosom whereon to recline our heads, and into which we may pour the torrent of our tears. Grief, with such a comfort, is almost a luxury. In a life where we are perpetually exposed to want and accident, yours is a wonderful proposition. To insulate ourselves, to retire from all aid, and to wrap ourselves in the mantle of self-sufficiency. For, assuredly, nobody will care for him who cares for nobody. But friendship is precious, not only in the shade, but in the sunshine of life. And thanks to a benevolent arrangement of things, the greater part of life is sunshine. I will recur proof to the days we have lately passed. As to myself, my health is good, except my wrist, which mends slowly, and my mind, which mends not at all, but broods constantly over your departure. The lateness of the season obliges me to decline my journey into the south of France. Present me in the most friendly terms to Mr. Causeway, and receive me into your own recollection with a partiality and warmth, proportioned not to my own poor merit, but to the sentiments of sincere affection and esteem, with which I have the honor to be, my dear madam, your most humble and obedient servant, Thomas Jefferson, Paris, 1786.